Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Cloud Native Testing Podcast. I'm today in Vilnius at the TestCon conference, which is very appropriate. And I'm delighted to be joined by Thomas Toe from Axon. Thomas, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you, Ole.
Thanks for joining. So I think you have a fascinating background and you're doing some fascinating stuff. So please tell us a little bit about yourself and what you're working on.
Yeah. So right now I'm a product manager at Axon. We're in the public safety domain. So I actually started my career as a software engineer at a test automation company, Katalon, and I worked on their flagship product as an engineer, and then I transitioned into product management, still doing some work on cloud testing infrastructure product. And then I spent a little bit of time at a business intelligence B2B SaaS startup, and now at Axon. So almost most of my experience has been with technical products for technical audience. So yeah, it's been an interesting journey.
It's interesting. So you started with Katalon, and how has that formed your kind of view of the testing space and how you've approached testing?
Yeah. So my perspective when I was at Calon is that I taught quality as like a very important aspect of development, but for very big companies. So because we had very big customers who are undergoing digital transformation. So they have a lot of legacy systems, and so they start primarily with end-to-end tests. It's very difficult for them to do unit testing, integration testing, and things like that. So in many cases, they want to just add a bunch of end-to-end tests to their web applications or whatever to make sure the core functionality works very well. And then that kind of like shapes my perspective about testing, because later on I learned about the testing pyramid, and it said that you shouldn't add too much end-to-end tests and just start at lower layers. And so that's when I work at other companies. That's the lesson I kind of like took away. If you want to approach testing in a efficient manner, then you should really start from lower layers of testing before moving on to eventually adding end-to-end tests.
Totally agree. And I'm just wondering how much the concept of like shift left, I'm sure you're familiar. How much do you think that drives or plays a part in kind of that testing pyramid and focusing on unit tests versus end-to-end tests?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, because when you're talking about shift left, we're talking about moving quality upstream. And so it is about enabling developers to own quality. And so you start to think about a whole different category of testing tools that are designed for developers. So this is very different from tools that are designed to do like end-to-end testing, because a lot of the users for these kind of like testing platform, end-to-end testing platforms are QA.
Mm.
But when you're doing shift left, it's actually they're still using the platform, but it's actually not the primary target user. So you're facing a different set of constraints and serving a different segment.
And so do you feel like there's a category of testers or QA who is not able to or like embrace shift left, or who kind of are not immune to the shift left initiative because they're stuck in tools that don't allow them to shift left in the same way, or processes, or how do you see that?
Yeah, I think there's definitely that group of QA. And one of the challenges is, of course, in terms of tooling, but also because of mindset. Because when you talk about shift left testing, a lot of QAs seem to think that it's going to take away their job. So because they spend a lot of time doing manual testing or like automating end-to-end tests, when that work gets shifted left, it seems to leave them with some concerns about their own futures. So that's where I think, not only toolings, but best practices and the sort of like testing culture is really important, because when you shift left, QAs actually get to do more interesting things in terms of building quality toolings and enabling engineers in the organization to embrace the quality mindset. So I
Mm.
think that's kind of like what is happening from what I've seen.
No, I totally agree. It feels to me like that's almost like an empowering in the sense that you can maybe do more exploratory testing. And I'm also guessing that shift left. I mean, the developers still have to write code. So even if you want to create more tests upstream, those still have to be written as automated tests. And that's also maybe a path for many QA professionals. So instead of doing manual tests and writing manual test scripts, they are now writing automated tests or writing code that will be integrated into the pipeline.
Yeah. So I think that's definitely a stage where that many companies are in. What I've seen is that developers oftentimes, when they embrace enough of the quality mindset, they actually want to not only own the development of manual test cases, but they also want to own the automation of that.
Mm,
So it means that QAs now are doing sort of like enablement more than actually writing and automating test cases.
mhm.
And also some of the QAs that are sort of more technical, they transition into more of a platform engineering roles that are
Mhm.
specifically dedicated for quality enablement and toolings.
Interesting. And I know there's sometimes like some skepticism against automated testing in the QA domain. Is that something that you've encountered? And if so, or even if not, what are your thoughts on how to kind of handle that?
Yeah. I think one perspective that so one way to look at quality that I think people are skeptical about is quality is just about like automated tests or testing before release. But I think a broader perspective is that quality is a culture, is a mindset. And so people can be skeptical about, specific testing trends or testing practices. But overall, I think everyone is aligned on the fact that quality is very important to organizations.
Mm,
And if you shift your perspective from, how do I write automate tests to how do I identify risk that are important to the organizations in terms of like business or technical, it's starting to, I think, empower a lot of people to deal with the skepticism that people generally have with
mm,
like
mm.
testing, because I think it's a very narrow perspective. If you shift your perspective into like quality ask risk management, it's much more holistic and then more comprehensive.
Oh, I think that's an excellent point. To your point is quality is much more than just automated tests or unit tests in your pipeline. It's a mindset, and it has to be kind of part of the process from the beginning. And I think that maybe think it's maybe I think developers would probably agree. I think the challenge there is then how do you keep that mindset all the way up to the manager level to make. I'm sure everyone subscribes to that quality is important, but how do you then mandate still having quality engineers across the entire process? So to your point, if you're not no longer running manual tests, people with a quality mindset or like a tester mindset are somewhat unique, I would say. Sometimes they can think of approaching quality with with new perspectives, and it's super important to have those people on the team, regardless if it's in relationship to writing automated tests or assessing requirements or kind of or doing more downstream quality activities.
Yeah, definitely.
One thing that we've encountered, or I've been encountering quite often, is not just the concept of shift left, but also the concept of shift right. And I'm wondering if that's something you've seen, and in the context of what you're doing now and what that means to you.
Yeah, so shift right testing, in my experience, if you want to test in production, it's gonna be very critical workflows and you have to be very strategic. Otherwise, you're gonna end up with just a suite of a lot of end-to-end tests that you have to run on production. Another perspective is, especially now we are dealing with cloud services, testing cloud services, end-to-end tests alone are not sufficient. You actually want to be able to uh, hit your services in production with kind of like a signal, some like synthetic monitoring, but for services, so that you can pinpoint exactly which services are failing. Because sometimes end-to-end tests they cover the entire workflow that's span across many services, and when an end-to-end test fails, it's very difficult to pinpoint exactly which service is causing the problem. So, in addition to end-to-end tests, you want to also have some sort of, I guess you can call it like in cluster tests that hit your services on production, and you have to do it very carefully because you don't want to run tests that modify data. You mostly want to do something safe like read, or even if you have to write your test, have to write some data, you have to be very careful because it's in production, it's going to affect people. So that's what I've seen in my experience.
No, I totally agree. You don't want to change the state of your system just for the sake of testing. I think there's what's also interesting is when I've talked to others about shift right is about the quality metrics they look at. So to your point, it could be running functional tests, but there are other quality metrics like around performance, around latency, of course, but also there are performance quality metrics just around the pipeline itself. How long time does it take for a new version of this service to actually go into production, and that's a quality metric that you can measure more internally to evaluate the efficiency of your pipelines and your infrastructure and your team. Is that something, those kind of more internally faced quality metrics, is that something you've encountered in your platform or in your work?
Yeah, yeah. So metrics like DORA are very important to track, especially if you want to not only care about quality in the sense of from an end user perspective, but quality throughout your deployment pipeline. So we do track DORA metrics, and it's an important part of trying to see which services are of high quality and in which services need to be developed in terms of quality so that we can prioritize our quality engineering and our efforts of the quality team, but on the engineering organization overall as well.
So thank you. So one thing I wanted to ask is, as you the work at Axon, and I'm guessing there's some shift to cloud native technologies going on, and maybe Kubernetes specifically. What challenges around testing have kind of come in the wake of that infrastructure transition?
Yeah. So for cloud native testing, I think the challenge that a lot of people face is that you are dealing with a lot of environments. So if you serve customers all over the world, you have to have different production instances for each of the customer segments. For example, in the US, people have specific regulations, and you have to actually deploy your software across different environments, and also means you have to maintain quality across the environments.
Right.
And there's also the difference between different cloud infrastructure providers. So for example, AWS have different dependencies than Azure. And when you're trying to approach quality from a cloud native testing perspective, it has a lot of constraints only in terms of developing automated tests, but how to get those automated tests into these environments. And so they may be restricted or difficult to manage
Right.
and deploy your test on. So I think these are the challenges that a lot of people face when it comes to testing Kubernetes and cloud things.
Oh, that's super interesting. So you're saying that if I have clusters in different geographic locations globally and I want to run tests in that might be kind of affected by regulations, regulatory aspects of those local regions or security aspects?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. What I've seen is that in many cases, engineering teams and QA teams are in different countries. So if you want to deploy your code to a production instance in the US, for example, and the engineering teams and the QA teams in Vietnam or in other Southeast Asia countries, they cannot gain access to that environment directly, perform testing there. So it gets a little bit tricky there. You have to navigate through all of the regulation and see what kind of data can you actually retrieve or what kind of actions can you perform. And that restricts the parameters of what you're able to test.
Oh, wow, that's super fascinating. It must also require a lot of planning. So you don't want to kind of be slowed down by these kind of regulatory aspects of testing. So I'm guessing it kind of slows down the overall release processes, etc. If you have these kind of hurdles to jump over for your testing.
Yeah, it requires more deliberate planning, but also you have to have a very strong quality culture in order to overcome these challenges because it's very easy to give up and say it's too difficult, we're not going to do it. But That's actually not gonna cut it if you want to deliver truly high quality software. So I think that's an enabling constraint in the sense that, yes, it limits what you're able to test, but it also forces you to be more strategic and more creative in terms of how you're able to deliver experience to your customers in a high quality manner.
Yeah, and if you kind of manage to handle those obstacles, you're more competitive, I'm guessing, because you can deliver globally in a different way than maybe others who've, to your point, said this is too hard or we're not going to do it.
Yeah.
So it might, but to your point, it also goes back to culture, what we said earlier. If there's a quality mindset in the organization, and I'm guessing those hurdles are also easier to overcome versus if it's just a tactical concern.
Yeah, yeah. It's so culture and mindset. So I think it's very easy to have that you have it's very easy to say that you have a quality mindset and culture, but it's actually about how you act on a day-to-day basis, how you handle incidents, how you talk about quality, where you actually prioritize quality on your to-do list. Those
Yeah.
are the things that characterize culture and mindset. So I think that also requires a very strong leadership with strong opinion about delivering quality products. So I think without all of these characteristics, it's very difficult to even reach a stage where you serve customers across the globe
Yeah.
because the bar for quality is getting higher and higher across the world,
Yeah.
especially now with LLM and
Yeah.
these technologies that enable even faster development cycle. People expect you to deliver software or products faster, but still meet the same bar of quality.
Yeah. Well, so thank you for saying LLM. I was gonna segue over to, I have to ask at least one AI question on these talks. So thanks for doing that. So I have to ask, so how is AI impacting your testing, and are you using AI for testing, or do you have any LLM based applications yourself that you're testing where you need to kind of validate that they are, responsible and all of that?
Yeah, so I think one of the areas that LLMs are most effective is facilitating shift left. So because if you just say, well, we're gonna do shift left, engineers are gonna have to do more work, then it's very difficult to for engineers to embrace these changes. You have to actually make the entire testing workflow easier for them. And that's when LLMs come in. Applications of people feeding PRDs and documents into a knowledge base, a RAG, a retrieval augmented system, a retrieval augmented graph system that empowers test case generation and also just generally do Q&As on questions that require business domain knowledge. So it makes it easier to onboard new hires to the team as well as facilitates engineers to own quality better. So I
Oh,
think that's where I've seen LLMs really become powerful.
that's super interesting. So you've built your own database of policies, etc., and then you have a RAG system that uses that to use that as context for helping developers or helping just across the entire engineering team. Or for what specific
Yeah.
tasks would you be using that RAG system?
So it can be used for test case generation as well as because we're in a platform team, we build products for our internal teams. So this rack system also empowers our Q&A system. For example, if someone has a question about how to use our products, they can actually interact with a chatbot to get the answer, having to wait for people to come up with an answer.
Okay, that's fascinating. And have you? So I recently did a talk on testing AI systems themselves. So I'm kind of intrigued by, so that RAG system that you've built, are you testing that in any way? Or have you implying, kind of ensuring that, the answers it gives you are relevant or, have accurate, as you kind of evolve the underlying database?
Yeah, that's a good question. Actually, it is just something that we started to prototype with, and right now we're not like treating it as a production system, so it's not so we don't like have any kind of like testing for that system. It's very much like an early prototype, but I've seen from other companies that are doing similar things. They doing evals for LLMs, and I think that has been effective for them. That's one technique that we also want to look into for our own use
Mm.
case.
Yeah. No, it's a fascinating space to your point. How do you test kind of the relevancy of the and the accuracy and the toxicity and everything that these systems can ultimately be prone to? And it goes back to the quality mindset that you talked about earlier. It's even there when you build your RAG system, you have to have that mindset, and especially in your case, if you use it to generate test cases, etc. Obviously, you don't want hallucinations there or any kind of data coming out of it. Super interesting. Uh, okay, great. Thank you so much, Thomas. This has been super fascinating to hear about some of the things you've been working with and the challenges you've had. Thank you so much for joining the podcast.
Thank you, Ole, for the opportunity, and I'm really glad to have this space to talk about my experience. And I look forward to what you and the test team is gonna deliver in the future.
Thank you so much. Take care. Goodbye.